Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel.
Hi, guys. So happy to have you here with us again today.
Okay, so today's format is a little different and honestly a little more dramatic than usual.
We're doing speed dating, sort of, a simulated version where I'm going to play a series of different dates and David's going to play the English learner trying to make a good impression, mistakes and all.
And then afterward, we break down what actually went wrong, what a native speaker would actually think in that moment, and how to fix it.
Because dating is honestly one of the highest pressure situations to use a second language in. There's nerves, there's timing, there's humor, there's flirting, and one small misstep can completely change how the whole interaction feels.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm David.
And I'm Emma, and let's get into round one.
Hello, nice to meet you. What is your name, please?
Hi, I'm Sarah. What's your name?
My name is David. I am very glad for making your acquaintance.
Okay, stop. Glad for making your acquaintance? Nobody has ever said that on a date in the history of dating.
That's exactly the mistake I wanted to make. That's a very literal, very formal translation of a polite phrase, and it just completely kills the natural flow of a casual first meeting.
Right, and here's the thing. It's not wrong. Grammatically, it's actually a correct sentence. But tonally, it's wildly mismatched for the situation. It sounds like you're meeting a business client, not a date.
So, what would actually work there instead?
Something as simple as, nice to meet you, is honestly enough. You don't need to add anything more formal on top of it. In fact, adding more formality in a casual romantic context can come across as nervous or oddly stiff.
Which is such a good point, actually, because a lot of learners think more formal equals safer, when in dating specifically, warmth and casualness usually land much better than formality.
Exactly. All right, reset, round three. And this one's going to be a little more emotionally loaded.
Can I ask you something personal? Are you finding someone right now?
Okay, are you finding someone is very different from what I think you meant.
Yeah, that one's rough. Finding makes it sound like an active, ongoing search happening right this second, like you're mid-search on a dating app while sitting across from someone.
Whereas the intended question was almost certainly, are you seeing someone or are you single, which is the natural way to ask about someone's relationship status.
This is such a classic verb confusion, though. Find versus see versus date. They all get tangled up because in a lot of languages, one single verb covers all of these different meanings, and English just splits them into separate specific verbs.
Right, seeing someone specifically means dating someone casually or early on. Dating someone is a bit more established, and finding someone isn't really used this way at all in English. It sounds almost like a shopping metaphor.
Which, to be fair, might accidentally be a little funny on an actual date, but probably not in the way you intended.
Definitely not the confident, smooth impression you were going for. All right, let's do round four, and this one's about compliments, because compliments are a whole minefield on their own.
You have very beautiful eyes. I like your eyes very much.
Oh, thank you. That's really sweet.
Okay, wait, that one actually worked pretty well, right?
It did. That's actually a great example of a mistake-free moment. Simple, direct, sincere. This is a good contrast to show that not everything needs correcting. Sometimes simple and grammatically basic is exactly right.
Which is honestly a relief to hear because I think a lot of learners assume every sentence needs to be complex or impressive to sound good.
Completely the opposite, actually. In romantic or casual contexts specifically, simple, sincere language usually outperforms complex, elaborate language every single time.
Good to know. All right, round five, and let's raise the stakes a little.
So, what are you looking for? Like, are you looking for something serious or just casual?
I want the marriage quickly, and children also quickly.
Okay, that's not even really a grammar mistake, that's more of an intensity mistake.
Right, the marriage with the definite article is a small error. We'd just say marriage, no the. But the bigger issue is the directness and speed of that answer.
In a lot of cultures, that level of directness this early would be completely normal, even expected. But in a lot of English-speaking dating contexts, especially in early conversations, that intensity can feel like a lot very fast.
So it's not wrong information, it's more of a pacing and cultural calibration issue, which honestly isn't really about English grammar at all. It's about conversational norms layered on top of the language.
Right. And this is such an important, underrated point for learners. Sometimes the mistake in a real conversation isn't linguistic at all. It's about matching the emotional pace of the exchange. And that's a much harder, much subtler skill to build.
A softer version might be something like, I'd love to eventually settle down and have a family, but I'm not in a rush. Same underlying meaning, completely different pacing and tone.
Much smoother landing. All right, round 6. Let's do a humor attempt because jokes are one of the hardest things to pull off in a second language.
Do you know what is funny? I am afraid of chickens. Since I was small child, a chicken chased me and now I have big fear.
Wait, that's actually really funny. Tell me more.
Okay, that one landed better than I expected, honestly.
It really did, and there's a lesson buried in there. Small grammar slips, since I was small child instead of since I was a small child, missing the article A, barely register at all when the content itself is genuinely engaging or funny.
So the actual content, the story, the vulnerability, the humor matters so much more than grammatical perfection in a lot of real conversation, especially emotionally engaging conversation like storytelling or humor.
Which circles back to something we've said in previous videos, confidence and content carry conversations. Grammar accuracy is honestly a smaller factor than most learners assume, especially once you're past a basic communication threshold.
Let's do one more round before we get to the sweeter ending, because I want to cover a mistake type we haven't touched yet, mixing up idioms mid-sentence.
So, what do you like to do for fun outside of work?
I like to kill two stones with one bird. For example, I go running and I listen podcasts at the same time.
Okay, kill two stones with one bird is a genuinely impressive attempt, but the actual idiom is kill two birds with one stone.
Right, the elements got flipped. Birds and stones swap places entirely. This happens a lot with idioms specifically because you're memorizing an unusual, non-literal phrase, and the individual pieces are easy to mix up under pressure.
And there was a second small slip too. Listen podcast instead of listen to a podcast. Listen needs that preposition to before the object, whereas a verb like watch doesn't. Watch a movie, no preposition needed.
Which is honestly one of those small preposition rules that just has to be memorized verb by verb. There's no clean universal pattern behind it.
True, but again, in the actual flow of a date, an idiom mix-up like that is far more likely to get a laugh than any real judgment. It's charming, if anything.
Genuinely, I think if someone said kill two stones with one bird to me on a real date, I'd find it endearing, not embarrassing.
Exactly, which is a good reminder that a lot of what learners fear as embarrassing mistakes actually read as charming or funny to native speakers, not as failures.
All right, let's do one more before the ending, and let's make this one about handling an actual disagreement or awkward moment, because that's realistic too. Not every date goes smoothly.
Actually, I have to be honest, I don't think this is really working for me.
Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you for your honest. I respect very much.
Thank you for your honest should be thank you for your honesty. Honest is the adjective, honesty is the noun, and after your, you need the noun form.
Right, that's a really common word form mistake. Using an adjective or a noun is grammatically required. And I respect very much, the natural order would be I really respect that, or I respect that a lot.
Small structural mistakes, but here's what I actually want to highlight about this round specifically. The emotional response itself was excellent. Calm, gracious, not defensive, not desperate.
Which honestly matters so much more in the rejection moment than grammatical precision does. How you emotionally handle a difficult moment in a date leaves a far bigger impression than a missing suffix on a noun.
Completely agree. A calm, respectful reaction to rejection, even with imperfect grammar, reads as maturity and confidence, which is genuinely attractive, regardless of language fluency level.
That's such an important point to end this section on because I think a lot of learners specifically dread awkward or negative moments the most, assuming their limited vocabulary will make things worse.
When really, tone and emotional intelligence carry those moments far more than vocabulary range does.
This was really nice. I'd love to see you again if you're interested.
Yes, me also. I had a very good time with you today, and I hope we can meeting again soon.
Small one there. Meeting again should be meet again. After can, you always use the base form of the verb. No ing, no to.
Right. Modal verbs can, will, should, must are always followed by the plain base form. Can meet, not can meeting, not can to meet.
But again, small, forgivable, completely understandable in context, and honestly, on a real date, this level of a mistake wouldn't derail the moment at all.
Let's talk for a second about why some of these mistakes felt embarrassing in the moment, but genuinely didn't matter at all, versus the ones that actually could shift how a native speaker perceives the interaction. Because I don't think all mistakes are created equal.
That's a great distinction, actually. Grammar mistakes, verb tense slips, missing articles, wrong prepositions, these almost never change how a native speaker feels about you. They register briefly and then get completely forgotten.
Whereas mismatches in tone, intensity, or pacing, like the marriage example earlier, tend to stick around a little longer in someone's impression. Not because they're wrong, but because they shift the emotional read of the whole interaction.
Which is honestly a really freeing thing to realize. You can relax enormously about grammar accuracy specifically, and instead put your energy into matching tone, warmth, and pacing, which matters so much more in a dating context.
It kind of reframes the entire anxiety around speaking a second language on a date. The fear is usually, I'll say something grammatically wrong and it'll ruin everything, when the real risk, if there is one, is almost never about grammar at all.
Which I think is true of most real-life English use outside of formal writing or academic contexts. Grammar mistakes are noise. Tone mismatches are signal.
Which I think is a great note to end the roleplay section on. Let's step back now and talk about the bigger patterns we saw across all 6 rounds.
So, pattern 1. Overly formal language in casual romantic contexts tends to backfire more than small grammar mistakes do. Warmth beats precision here.
Pattern 2, verb tense errors, especially around duration, since versus for, present perfect versus simple present, are extremely common and rarely cause real confusion. They just create tiny half-second hiccups.
Pattern 3, specific verb choice matters a lot in emotionally loaded topics. Seeing, dating, and finding are not interchangeable, even though a learner's native language might treat them as one single concept.
Pattern 4, simple, sincere language often outperforms complex language, especially for compliments and emotional moments.
Pattern 5, pacing and intensity matter just as much as grammar. Matching the emotional speed of a conversation is a real skill, separate entirely from vocabulary or grammar knowledge.
And pattern 6, genuine content, stories, humor, vulnerability, consistently outweighs small grammar imperfections in how a conversation actually feels to the other person.
Which honestly, if you zoom out, is true of dating in any language, not just English as a second language. Connection matters more than perfect delivery.
That's such a good way to put it. So if you're learning English and you're nervous about dating in it specifically, the real takeaway here isn't study more grammar before you try.
It's the mistakes are genuinely fine, mostly forgivable, and mostly invisible compared to how much confidence, warmth, and authentic content actually shape the interaction.
Let us know in the comments if you've ever had an English dating story. Good, bad, or hilariously awkward. We want to hear the real ones.
And if you enjoyed this format, let us know, because we've got ideas for more role-play-based videos. Job interviews in English, ordering at a restaurant, arguing with customer service, all with the same real mistakes, real breakdown approach.
If this helped you feel a little less nervous about real conversation,
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel.
hi guys, so happy to have you here with us again today.
Okay, today's topic is a little heavier than usual, but I think it's genuinely one of the most important videos we've made.
Why most English learners fail and what the ones who actually succeed do differently. And I want to say up front, fail doesn't mean stupid or untalented or incapable. It's almost never about ability.
Right. In years of teaching and talking to learners, the difference between people who plateau for a decade and people who become genuinely fluent almost never comes down to intelligence or even natural talent for languages.
It comes down to psychology, mostly. and a handful of specific learnable behaviors. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Emma.
And I'm David. And let's start with the uncomfortable part first, because I think it matters to name it honestly.
Go ahead.
Most people who fail to learn English aren't failing because of grammar. They're failing because of shame, avoidance, and a handful of very human psychological traps that nobody warns them about.
Let's break down the traps one at a time, starting with the biggest one we see constantly: perfectionism.
Perfectionism is honestly the #1 language killer we encounter. Someone wants to speak, has the vocabulary, has studied for years, but refuses to actually open their mouth until they feel ready.
And here's the psychological trap hidden inside that. Ready never actually arrives. There's no finish line where suddenly you feel fully prepared to speak without fear.
So people wait and study more grammar and watch more videos, and the waiting itself becomes a form of avoidance, dressed up as diligence.
It feels productive. You're still learning, so it doesn't feel like failure in the moment, but months or years pass and actual spoken fluency never develops because speaking practice keeps getting postponed indefinitely.
Whereas the learners who actually become fluent almost universally describe an early period of embarrassing, clumsy, imperfect speaking that they push through anyway.
Which brings us to the first real difference between people who fail and people who succeed. Successful learners treat mistakes as data, not as identity. Meaning, when a struggling learner makes a mistake, the internal story is often something like, "I'm bad at this," or "I'll never get this right," which is a statement about identity, about who they are.
Whereas a successful learner makes the exact same mistake and the internal story is closer to, "Oh, that's a pattern I haven't fully learned yet," which is a statement about information, not identity.
That single shift in internal narrative changes everything, because identity-based shame makes you want to avoid the activity entirely, while information-based curiosity makes you want to engage with it more.
It's such a subtle difference on paper, but it completely determines whether someone quits after a rough conversation or comes back for more.
There's a really specific version of this we see constantly too. The learner who's technically capable of holding a conversation, has been for a while honestly, but avoids situations where they might be corrected because being corrected feels like being exposed as a fraud.
Right, and that's connected to something psychologists sometimes call imposter syndrome. This persistent feeling that your actual competence is somehow fake, or that you're one mistake away from everyone realizing you don't really know the language.
Which creates this strange self-defeating pattern where the more capable someone becomes, the more anxious they get about being found out, rather than feeling increasingly confident as their skill genuinely grows.
Successful learners tend to break this cycle specifically by exposing themselves to correction voluntarily and often, treating a correction not as an exposure of a flaw, but as free, valuable information handed to them by someone else.
Almost like reframing a corrector as a collaborator helping you improve, rather than a judge delivering a verdict on your worth as a speaker.
Let's talk about the second major trap: comparison. Specifically comparing your current speaking ability to other people's, or worse, to native speakers.
This one's brutal, especially with social media now. You watch someone who's been learning for 2 years sounding incredibly fluent, and you compare that to your own first month of stumbling through basic sentences.
And the comparison feels informative, like useful feedback, but it's actually almost entirely useless because you're comparing your beginning to someone else's middle or their curated highlight reel, not their actual struggling process.
Successful learners, from what we've seen, tend to compare themselves only to their own past self. Am I better than I was a month ago? Not, am I as good as this other person?
Which sounds like a small mindset tweak, but it removes an enormous unnecessary source of discouragement that causes a lot of people to quit early, often right around the point where real progress is actually starting to happen.
There's also an interesting phenomenon connected to this, sometimes called the plateau illusion. Progress in language learning genuinely isn't linear. There are periods of rapid, visible improvement, followed by long stretches where nothing seems to be changing at all, even though a lot is actually developing underneath the surface.
Right, a lot of listening comprehension and internal pattern recognition builds up quietly during those plateau periods. And then, suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, there's a noticeable jump in fluency, almost like the progress had been accumulating invisibly the whole time.
Learners who compare themselves against a smooth, steadily rising expectation tend to panic during these plateau periods, assuming something's gone wrong when actually a plateau is a completely normal, expected part of the process.
Successful learners tend to know this pattern exists ahead of time, so a plateau doesn't trigger panic or quitting. It's just recognized as, okay, this is one of those stretches. I'll keep showing up and trust the process.
Let's talk about trap number 4, and this one's a bit sneakier: motivation dependency.
Meaning relying on feeling motivated in order to study, rather than having a system that works regardless of how you feel that day.
Right. A huge number of people study English enthusiastically for 2 or 3 weeks, feeling excited and inspired. And then motivation naturally fades. Because motivation naturally fades. It's not a stable, reliable resource.
And when motivation fades and there's no underlying system or habit structure to fall back on, the whole practice collapses completely, sometimes for months until a new burst of motivation eventually shows up again.
Whereas successful learners build what's often called identity-based habits rather than motivation-based ones. Instead of "I feel motivated to study today," it becomes "I am someone who studies English daily, regardless of mood."
Which connects back to our 30 minutes a day video actually. A small, consistent, non-negotiable system beats occasional bursts of high motivation every single time over a long enough timeline.
Motivation gets you started. Systems and identity are what actually keep you going once the initial excitement inevitably fades.
Let's talk about trap number 4. Fear of judgment, specifically social fear around sounding foreign or being laughed at or embarrassing yourself in front of native speakers.
This fear is completely understandable, by the way. It's not irrational. It's a very human, evolutionarily deep fear of social rejection and embarrassment.
But here's the thing that successful learners eventually internalize, usually the hard way. Almost nobody is actually judging you nearly as harshly as you're judging yourself in that moment.
Native speakers, in our experience, are overwhelmingly patient and encouraging towards someone visibly trying to speak their language. The harsh judgment learners fear mostly exists inside their own head, not out in the actual world.
Which doesn't mean the fear isn't real or that it's easy to just switch off, but successful learners tend to act despite the fear, rather than waiting for the fear to disappear first, because it often doesn't fully disappear. You just get more practice at acting alongside it.
That's such an important distinction. Confidence isn't actually the absence of fear, it's action taken while the fear is still present.
Let's talk about trap number 5 now, treating English learning as a project with an endpoint rather than an ongoing relationship or lifestyle.
This is such a common framing. I'll learn English, finish it, and then I'm done. But language isn't really a project you complete, like building a piece of furniture. It's more like fitness or nutrition, an ongoing practice.
And when people frame it as a finite project, every plateau, every difficult week feels like a personal failure of the whole project, rather than a completely normal part of a long, ongoing process.
Successful learners, from what we've observed, tend to reframe language learning as simply part of their identity and lifestyle long term, not a task with a deadline they're racing against.
Which removes an enormous amount of pressure because a plateau in an ongoing lifestyle is just a normal week. But a plateau in a project with a deadline feels like falling behind or failing outright.
There's actually a related psychological concept worth mentioning here, something researchers sometimes call the arrival fallacy, the belief that reaching a specific goal will produce a lasting, stable feeling of satisfaction or completion.
Right, and with language learning specifically, there's no true arrival point where you suddenly feel fully done, fully fluent, with nothing left to improve. Even highly advanced speakers keep encountering new vocabulary, new idioms, new contexts they haven't mastered yet.
So, chasing that arrival feeling, that moment of "I finally made it," sets learners up for a strange kind of disappointment even after real, measurable progress, because the finish line keeps quietly moving further away.
Whereas learners who've let go of the arrival fallacy tend to find satisfaction in the process itself, in small daily wins, rather than waiting for some distant future moment of feeling complete.
Let's talk about trap number 6, and this one's a bit more practical than psychological: Inconsistent input difficulty, which we've actually touched on before, but it deserves attention here specifically because of how it interacts with motivation and shame.
Right. If content is consistently too difficult, way above your current level, you experience constant, repeated small failures, which compounds the shame and avoidance patterns we've already talked about.
And if content is consistently too easy, you get bored, and boredom is honestly just as damaging to long term consistency as frustration is, because it kills the engagement needed to keep showing up.
Successful learners are usually pretty good, often unconsciously, at finding that stretch zone. Comprehensible input that's challenging but not overwhelming, which keeps both frustration and boredom low enough to sustain daily practice.
Let's move to trap number 7, and this one's might be the most psychologically interesting of all or nothing thinking around missed days or lapses in practice.
This one's huge. Someone misses one day of studying, maybe because of a busy work week. And instead of just resuming the next day, there's this internal narrative of, well, I already broke my streak. What's the point now?
And that single missed day spirals into a missed week, then a missed month, sometimes into completely abandoning the entire effort, all triggered by one single missed session that genuinely didn't need to matter that much.
Successful learners, from what we've seen, consistently treat a missed day as a single missed day, nothing more. No symbolic meaning attached to it. They simply resume the next day without any dramatic internal story about it.
Which sounds almost too simple, but psychologically, it's a huge difference. One missed day is just noise, statistically irrelevant over a year of practice. It's only the meaning we attach to it that turns it into a real problem.
Let's talk now about what winners specifically do, pulling all of this together into some concrete, practical patterns beyond just the mindset shifts we've covered.
First, successful learners externalize their practice, meaning they make it visible and somewhat social rather than keeping it entirely private and internal.
This could be posting short videos of themselves speaking, joining a language exchange group, or simply telling friends about their goal, which creates a small layer of accountability that pure private study doesn't provide.
Second, successful learners tend to attach emotional meaning to the language itself, not just to the abstract goal of being fluent someday. They connect with music, shows, communities, or people that genuinely interest them personally.
Which transforms the language from a chore into a doorway toward things they actually care about. And that emotional connection sustains motivation far longer than an abstract, distant goal ever could.
Third, and this connects to a few points we've already made, successful learners track effort and consistency, not just outcomes or test scores.
Meaning, the daily win isn't, did I become noticeably more fluent today? Which is basically unmeasurable day to day. It's, did I show up and do my practice today? Which is completely within their control every single day.
Fourth, successful learners actively seek out discomfort in a structured, intentional way rather than avoiding it, specifically around speaking practice.
Meaning, they deliberately put themselves in slightly uncomfortable speaking situations regularly. Language exchanges, ordering food in English, joining a conversation group, rather than waiting for comfort to arrive naturally before attempting it.
Fifth, and I think this is honestly underrated, successful learners give themselves genuine permission to be a beginner for a long time, without treating that beginner phase as embarrassing or shameful.
Which circles all the way back to where we started this video. Shame is really the core enemy running underneath almost every single trap we've described today. Perfectionism, comparison, fear of judgment, all or nothing thinking, they're all fundamentally different expressions of shame around not yet being fluent.
And the learners who succeed have generally found some way to separate their sense of self-worth from their current level of English ability, which sounds abstract, but practically just means they can make a mistake, laugh it off, and keep going, without it feeling like a wound to their identity.
There's a sixth practical pattern worth adding here too, something we've noticed consistently. Successful learners tend to practice a specific kind of self-talk after a rough conversation or a bad study session, something closer to how you'd talk to a good friend rather than how a lot of people default to talking to themselves.
Meaning, if a friend told you they mixed up a verb tense on a date or froze up mid-sentence in a work meeting, you'd almost certainly respond with something reassuring. That happens to everyone. You'll get it next time, not harsh criticism.
But so many learners talk to themselves internally with exactly that harsh criticism. I'm so stupid. I'll never get this. After the exact same kind of minor mistake. And that harsh internal voice is genuinely corrosive to long-term consistency.
Researchers sometimes call this self-compassion, and it's not the same thing as lowering your standards or making excuses. It's simply treating yourself with the same basic patience you'd naturally extend to someone else going through the same learning process.
And practically, learners who build this habit recover from setbacks noticeably faster. A bad conversation doesn't spiral into a bad week, it's just a bad 5 minutes, processed and then set aside.
Let's talk about one more thing before we wrap up. Something we haven't touched on yet. The role of community specifically, because isolation makes every single one of these traps significantly worse.
Completely agree. Learning entirely alone with no community, no accountability, no shared experience with other learners makes perfectionism, shame, and motivation dependency all considerably harder to overcome on your own.
Whereas even a small community, a study partner, an online group, a language exchange partner, provides normalization. You see other people making the exact same mistakes, struggling with the exact same plateaus, and it becomes much harder to internalize your own struggles as some kind of unique personal failure.
Which is honestly part of why we make these videos at all, to build a bit of that community and normalization directly through the channel itself.
Let's address one more myth before we close, because it comes up constantly in our comments. The idea that some people are simply not language people, that certain personalities or brains are naturally suited to language learning and others just aren't.
This belief causes so much unnecessary quitting, because if you believe you're fundamentally not a language person, every struggle confirms that belief, rather than being seen as a normal part of a difficult, ongoing skill anyone can build.
And realistically, the research on this is pretty clear. Adult language acquisition is absolutely possible for nearly everyone. The differences we see mostly come down to exposure, consistency, and exactly the psychological patterns we've spent this whole video breaking down, not some fixed innate talent.
Age gets blamed constantly too. I'm too old to learn a new language now. But plenty of adults become genuinely fluent well into their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond when they apply consistent, structured practice over time.
What changes with age generally isn't capacity. It's usually available time, accumulated fear of embarrassment, and sometimes fewer immersive opportunities. All things we've already covered today, not some biological ceiling on ability.
So if you've ever told yourself, I'm just not a language person, or I'm too old for this now, we genuinely encourage you to treat that belief as one more trap on today's list, rather than an actual fact about yourself.
Let's do a quick recap of everything before we close out, because there was a lot covered today.
The traps: perfectionism disguised as diligence, harmful comparison to others, motivation dependency instead of systems, fear of judgment, treating learning as a finite project, inconsistent input difficulty, and all or nothing thinking around missed days.
And what winners do instead. They externalize practice for accountability, attach genuine emotional meaning to the language, track consistency rather than unmeasurable daily outcomes, seek structured discomfort deliberately, give themselves real permission to be a beginner, and build or find community around the process.
And underneath basically all of it, the biggest single shift is separating your self-worth from your current skill level, so that mistakes become information instead of identity.
If any of these traps sounded uncomfortably familiar today, that's genuinely completely normal. We've experienced most of them ourselves in one form or another at different points.
Let us know in the comments which trap hit closest to home, and more importantly, which one you're going to start working on this week.
We read every single comment, and honestly, hearing your specific struggles helps us make better, more targeted videos going forward.
If this resonated with you, hit subscribe because we've got a follow-up video planned specifically on building a sustainable, shame-free daily practice routine, building directly on everything we talked about today.
That one's going to get very practical very quickly.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
And honestly, if this video gave you even one thing to think about differently, the single most helpful thing you can do for us is hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every follow genuinely helps this channel keep growing.
So if you believe in what we're building here, take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and consider sharing this with a friend who's struggling with their own English journey. It genuinely makes a difference, and it's the reason we're able to keep this going.
Thank you so much for being here. For real. We'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel.
Hi guys, so happy to have you here with us again today.
Okay, so today's video is a little different, and honestly, a bit more personal than usual.
It is. I've actually been putting off telling this story for a while, mostly because it still feels a little vulnerable to talk about.
Which is exactly why I think it's worth sharing. Welcome back everyone, I'm David.
And I'm Emma, and today I want to talk about one specific mindset shift that genuinely changed everything for me with language learning. Not English exactly, but the second language I learned as an adult, which honestly gives me a lot of empathy for the struggles our viewers describe.
Right, people sometimes forget that Emma's been on the other side of this exact struggle too, learning a language as an adult, not just teaching one.
Completely. And for a long time, I was stuck in a really specific, really damaging pattern that I didn't even fully recognize until it had already cost me years of slower progress than necessary.
Before we get into the pattern itself, can you set the scene a little? Why were you learning that language in the first place? What was the actual motivation?
I'd moved to a new country for a relationship and genuinely wanted to be able to connect with my partner's family, join real conversations at dinner, not just smile and nod along while everyone spoke around me.
That's such a strong, emotionally meaningful motivation. Honestly, stronger than a lot of the more abstract reasons people often start learning a language for.
It really was strong. And that's actually part of what makes the story a bit painful in hindsight, because I had every reason to want to speak quickly, real relationships depending on it, and I still let fear override that motivation for 2 entire years.
Take me back to the beginning of that. What did your actual speaking ability look like day to day?
So for the first couple of years, I was what I'd now call a silent perfectionist. I studied constantly, grammar books, vocabulary apps, grammar exercises, genuinely a lot of effort, but I almost never spoke out loud to anyone in real conversation.
Why not if you were putting in that much study time?
Because in my head, there was this belief that speaking before you're ready would somehow damage your progress permanently, like you'd accidentally teach yourself bad habits that would stick forever if you spoke imperfectly too early.
That's such a common belief, actually. We hear some version of that constantly in our comments.
It felt completely logical to me at the time. I thought, if I just study enough grammar, enough vocabulary, eventually I'll reach some invisible threshold of readiness, and then I'll start speaking, confidently, correctly from that point onward.
And how long did you actually wait using that logic?
Almost 2 full years, 2 years of daily study, genuinely serious effort, and almost zero actual spoken conversation practice because I was always waiting for that feeling of readiness that, looking back now, was never actually going to arrive on its own.
What did your actual speaking ability look like after those 2 years of study without much speaking practice?
This is the part that's honestly a little embarrassing to admit. My grammar knowledge was genuinely advanced at that point, probably better than a lot of people who'd been speaking fluently for years. But the first time I tried to have a real, unscripted conversation, I froze up almost completely.
What did that freezing up actually feel like?
My mind would go completely blank, even though I technically knew the words and grammar needed. There's this specific kind of panic where you know the information exists somewhere in your brain, but you genuinely cannot access it in real time under real conversational pressure.
That sounds incredibly discouraging, especially after 2 years of serious, consistent effort.
It was devastating, honestly. I remember specifically thinking, I've clearly wasted 2 years because none of this knowledge is actually usable. That thought alone nearly made me quit entirely.
So, what actually happened next? Because obviously you didn't quit.
I came incredibly close. But around that same time, I had a conversation with a friend who was also learning language, a completely different one. And she said something that genuinely reframed everything for me.
What does she say?
She said, "You're treating speaking like the final exam after studying, when really speaking badly is actually part of the studying itself." That one sentence completely broke apart the entire mental model I'd been operating under for 2 years.
Can you unpack that a bit more? Because I think that's genuinely the core of the mindset shift.
Sure, my old model was linear. Study first, accumulate knowledge, reach some threshold of readiness, then begin speaking, ideally correctly from that point onward. Speaking was the reward or the test at the end of a long preparation phase.
And the new model?
The new model was circular, or maybe more like a feedback loop. Speak imperfectly, immediately, notice specifically where you struggled in that real conversation, then study exactly that specific gap, then speak again, using what you just reinforced, and repeat that loop continuously.
So, speaking moved from being the final destination to being a continuous input into the learning process itself.
Exactly. And once I made that shift mentally, everything about my actual practice changed. I stopped avoiding conversation practice because I no longer believed speaking imperfectly would somehow damage my progress.
What was the very first thing you actually did differently, practically, after that mindset shift happened?
I found a language exchange partner within about a week, which felt terrifying at the time. And I had, without exaggeration, one of the most awkward, halting conversations of my entire life.
What made it so difficult specifically?
I froze constantly, mixed up basic tenses I actually knew perfectly well on paper, and there were multiple long, uncomfortable silences where I just couldn't find the words at all, even simple ones.
How did you feel afterwards, emotionally, right after that first conversation?
Honestly, simultaneously humiliated and strangely energized. Humiliated because it felt like proof of everything I'd feared about speaking too early, but energized because for the first time in 2 years, I had real, specific, concrete information about exactly what I needed to work on.
Which is such an interesting contrast to the 2 years of pure study beforehand.
Completely different kind of information. 2 years of grammar study told me abstract rules. One uncomfortable, imperfect conversation told me exactly, specifically, precisely where my real gaps actually were under real conversational pressure.
So, what did you actually do with that specific information from the first conversation?
I made a small, targeted list that same evening, the specific tenses I froze on, the specific vocabulary gaps that came up. And I spent my next study session directly addressing those exact identified gaps instead of following some generic, unrelated study plan.
And then you had another conversation.
3 days later, yes, and it was still difficult, still uncomfortable in places, but noticeably, measurably less difficult than the first one, specifically around the exact gaps I'd just addressed.
That's such a tight, fast feedback loop compared to what you were doing for the previous 2 years.
Genuinely night and day, within about 6 weeks of consistently repeating that speak, identify, study, speak again loop, I made more noticeable, usable progress than I had during the entire previous 2 years of pure study.
That's a genuinely striking comparison. 2 years versus 6 weeks.
It's honestly a little painful to say out loud because those 2 years weren't wasted exactly. The grammar knowledge was real and useful, but it was sitting there completely inert, unusable, until I actually started forcing myself to access it under real conversational pressure.
Did anyone around you notice the change during those 6 weeks? Family, friends, the language exchange partner herself?
My language exchange partner definitely did. Around week 4 or 5, she actually said something like, "You're responding so much faster now. It's a completely different conversation than a month ago." And hearing that from someone else, not just noticing it myself, made it feel real in a way that internal progress alone hadn't quite managed to.
That's such a meaningful moment, having external confirmation of something you'd been quietly working toward.
It really was, and it also made me a little emotional, honestly, because I remember specifically thinking about all those earlier months where I'd avoided exactly this kind of feedback, purely out of fear, when it turned out to be the single most useful thing I could have been doing the entire time.
Did that realization change how you felt about the 2 years beforehand? Any regret, or did you make peace with it?
Both, honestly, at different points. There were definitely moments of real frustration, thinking about how much faster I could have progressed if I'd made this shift earlier. But over time, I've made genuine peace with it, partly because that grammar foundation genuinely did matter. It just needed the speaking practice to actually activate it.
Which is a nuance worth pointing out clearly, because I don't want anyone watching this to think grammar study itself was the problem.
No, not at all, and that's such an important clarification. The problem wasn't studying grammar. The problem was treating study and speaking as two separate sequential phases, instead of one continuous intertwined loop happening at the same time.
Right, it's not study instead of speaking versus speak instead of studying. It's weaving both together from the very beginning, even when speaking feels genuinely uncomfortable and imperfect.
Exactly. And once I understood that distinction clearly, it also removed a lot of the guilt I used to feel about the earlier 2 years, because the effort itself was genuine. It was just missing one critical connecting piece.
Let's talk about why this mindset shift specifically works from a learning science perspective, because I think that context helps people trust it beyond just your personal story.
Sure. There's a well-documented gap between what's called receptive knowledge, information you recognize when you see it or hear it, and productive knowledge, information you can actively retrieve and use under real-time pressure.
And pure study, reading, grammar exercises, vocabulary apps mostly builds receptive knowledge without necessarily building productive access to that same knowledge.
Right. Whereas actual speaking practice, specifically the uncomfortable, real-time pressure of live conversation, is really the only thing that directly trains productive retrieval. That ability to pull information out under pressure rather than just recognizing it passively.
Which explains exactly why your grammar knowledge, genuinely advanced on paper, was almost completely inaccessible the first time you actually needed to use it in real time.
Exactly. I'd built an enormous library of receptive knowledge, but almost no trained pathway for productive real-time retrieval because I'd been avoiding exactly the practice that builds that specific pathway.
So if someone watching this recognizes themselves in your old pattern, waiting for readiness, studying constantly, avoiding real conversation, what would you actually tell them to do, specifically, starting today?
Genuinely find any low-stakes way to speak even briefly this week. A language exchange app, a tutor, even just recording yourself talking out loud about your day for 2 minutes. And treat the discomfort you feel as useful information, not as evidence you're doing something wrong.
And then specifically use that discomfort, the exact places you froze or struggled, as your next study targets, rather than following some generic, unrelated study plan.
Exactly. Close that loop. Speak, notice specifically where it hurt, study exactly that gap, speak again. Repeat that continuously, rather than treating speaking as a distant reward waiting at the end of a long preparation phase.
That's such a powerful reframe. And honestly, I think a lot of our viewers are living in exactly that 2-year version of the story right now without realizing there's a faster path available.
Which is really the whole reason I wanted to share this today. Even though it still feels a little vulnerable admitting how long I personally stayed stuck in that pattern before finally breaking out of it.
I think that vulnerability is honestly what makes this story land so well, because it shows that even people who eventually become fluent, even people who teach this stuff professionally now, went through exactly this same struggle at some point.
Completely. Nobody skips the uncomfortable part. The difference is just how long you let yourself stay stuck avoiding it before finally leaning into it.
Let us know in the comments if you recognize yourself in Emma's old 2-year pattern and if today's the day you're finally going to have that first uncomfortable conversation.
We genuinely want to hear about it, good, bad, or hilariously awkward, because that discomfort really is the exact sign that real progress is starting to happen.
And honestly, if this story resonated with you even a little, the single most helpful thing you can do for us is hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every follow genuinely helps this channel keep growing.
The more of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing this with someone who's stuck exactly where I was stuck for those 2 years, the more resources we have to keep making honest, personal videos like this one, instead of shallow, recycled tips you've already heard 100 times.
So if you believe in what we're building here, take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and consider sharing this with a friend who needs to hear it. It genuinely makes a difference, and it's the reason we're able to keep this going.
Thank you so much for being here. For real. We'll see you in the next.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel.
Hi guys, so happy to have you here with us again today.
Okay, so a lot of you have seen our short clips, one word that makes you sound native, and honestly, they've done really well. But we keep getting the same request in the comments.
Can you do a longer version with more words and actually explain why each one works? So that's exactly what today's video is.
Welcome back everyone, I'm David.
And I'm Emma. And today we're going through a full list of single words and short phrases that genuinely shift how native your English sounds, plus the actual reasoning behind each one.
Let's start with a classic, the word actually.
This one's so underrated. Learners often use it correctly for correction. Actually, I think it's Tuesday. But native speakers use it constantly as a soft conversational connector too, not just for correcting facts.
Right, actually, that reminds me of something. Or, I actually really like that movie, where it's adding emphasis or a slight pivot, not correcting anyone.
Sprinkling actually naturally into casual sentences, even when nothing's being corrected, instantly makes speech sound more fluid and native.
Next one, though, used at the end of a sentence.
This is such a specific native pattern. I don't really like coffee. I'll try it though. Putting though at the very end instead of starting with however or but is extremely common in casual native speech.
And it's rarely taught this way in textbooks, which almost always teach however as the go-to contrast word, when in casual speech, ending a sentence with though sounds far more natural.
Next, the word honestly.
Honestly as a sentence opener is everywhere in native speech. Honestly, I have no idea. Honestly, that's a great point. It signals sincerity and casual tone immediately.
Honestly, as a sentence opener, is everywhere in native speech. Honestly, I have no idea. Honestly, that's a great point. It signals sincerity and casual tone immediately.
Next word, literally, though this one comes with a small warning.
Right, literally gets used constantly in casual native speech, often not literally at all. I literally can't even. I was literally dying laughing. It's become an intensifier more than its actual dictionary meaning.
Using it this way instantly signals casual, native-level fluency, but it's worth knowing it's very informal, so it fits friends and casual settings, not formal or professional contexts.
Next, the word basically.
This is a great simplifying word. Basically, what happened was, it signals you're about to summarize or simplify something, and it's used constantly in natural explanations.
Learners sometimes jump straight into a complex explanation without any signal first, and adding basically at the start makes the whole explanation feel more organized and natural to a native listener.
Next word, kind of, or its contracted form, kinda.
This is a hedging word, softening a statement without fully committing to it. I kind of liked it. I'm kinda tired. It shows nuance and casual uncertainty in a very native way.
Learners sometimes speak in absolutes, I liked it or I didn't like it, when native speakers constantly hedge with kind of, sort of, a little, to add nuance to opinions.
Next, the phrase I mean.
I mean is a fantastic native filler and clarifier. I mean, it's not perfect, but it works. It signals you're about to explain, clarify, or slightly soften what you just said.
It's used so often in casual native speech that its complete absence can actually make speech sound slightly stiff or overly formal by comparison.
Next word, totally.
Totally as an enthusiastic agreement word. Totally agree. That's totally fine. It's warmer and more casual than simply saying yes or I agree.
And it works as a standalone response too. Someone says something and you just respond totally.
which reads as natural, warm agreement in a way a flat yes doesn't quite capture.
Next, anyway, specifically used to redirect a conversation.
This is such a useful native transition word. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Anyway, how was your weekend? It signals a topic shift smoothly without an awkward silence or abrupt jump.
Learners sometimes just abruptly change topics without any transition word at all, which can feel jarring, whereas anyway smooths that transition naturally.
Next word, stuff, used as a casual substitute for more specific nouns.
I've got some stuff to do today. There's a lot of stuff in this article. It's vague on purpose, and native speakers use it constantly instead of specifying every single detail.
Learners sometimes overspecify everything, listing out every item, when a native speaker would often just say stuff and let context fill in the rest.
Next, guys, used to address a group regardless of gender in most casual contexts.
Hey guys, what do you guys think? It's become a fairly gender-neutral, casual group address in a lot of English-speaking contexts, and it's extremely common in everyday conversation.
Some learners stick to more formal group addresses like everyone or people, which aren't wrong, but guys specifically signals a very casual, friendly register.
Next word, right, used at the end of a statement to check agreement.
It's at 8, right? You're coming tomorrow, right? This tag usage checks understanding or agreement quickly, and it's used constantly in casual native speech.
It's similar to a tag question, but much shorter and more flexible, and using it naturally makes speech sound noticeably more fluent.
Next, well, used as a sentence starter, especially before a slightly hesitant or complicated answer.
Well, it's complicated. Well, I guess so. This small pause word signals thoughtfulness or slight hesitation before continuing, and it's one of the most common native speech openers there is.
Learners sometimes answer immediately and directly without this small buffer word, which isn't wrong, but adding well before a nuanced answer makes the response feel more natural and considered.
Next, pretty, used as an intensifier, not related to appearance at all.
It's pretty good. That's pretty interesting. This use of pretty confuses a lot of learners initially because it has nothing to do with beauty here. It just means fairly or quite.
And it's used constantly this way in casual speech, so recognizing and using this meaning specifically makes a huge difference in sounding native.
Next, yeah, used with variations in tone to mean much more than simple agreement.
A drawn-out yeah can signal hesitation or doubt. A quick, flat yeah signals casual agreement. An enthusiastic yeah signals excitement. The word barely changes, but the tone carries an enormous amount of meaning.
Some learners stick to a single, flat yes for every context, when native speakers rely heavily on yeah with varied tone to communicate a much wider emotional range.
Next, sure, used as a casual, flexible response.
Sure, sounds good. Want some? Sure. It works as agreement, acceptance, or casual confirmation, and it's often more natural sounding than a full, yes, that would be great.
It's short, easy, and extremely common, and using it appropriately in casual exchanges signals real conversational fluency.
Next, obviously, used with a specific conversational tone.
Obviously, I'm going to help you. It signals confidence and closeness, often used between friends to emphasize something that feels self-evident to the speaker.
It's worth using carefully, though, because overused, it can sound slightly dismissive or sarcastic. So tone and context really matter with this particular word.
Next word, apparently, used to signal secondhand information.
Apparently, it's supposed to rain tomorrow. Apparently, she already left. It signals you heard something from somewhere else without fully committing to whether it's true, and it's used constantly in casual storytelling.
Learners sometimes say, I heard that, every single time, which is completely correct, but apparently does the same job in a single word and it sounds noticeably more native and efficient.
Next, kinda like, used specifically when describing or comparing something loosely.
It's kinda like a mix between a burger and a sandwich. This casual comparison structure is everywhere in native speech, especially when explaining something unfamiliar using a familiar reference point.
It's a small phrase, but it makes explanations feel much more natural and conversational than a more formal comparison structure would.
Next one, no worries.
Use as a casual response to thanks or apology.
Thanks for waiting. No worries. It's replaced "you're welcome" in a huge amount of casual native speech, especially in American and Australian English, and it signals real, relaxed, friendly warmth.
Learners often default to the more textbook "you're welcome," which is completely fine. But "no worries" specifically signals casual comfort between the speakers.
Next, for sure, used as an enthusiastic form of agreement.
Want to grab lunch later? For sure. It's warmer and more casual than a simple yes, similar to totally, and it's extremely common as a short standalone response.
And last one to add to our expanded list, I guess, used to signal a slightly reluctant or uncertain agreement.
I guess that makes sense. I guess we could try that. It's softer than a full yes and signals mild hesitation or reconsideration in a very natural, native way.
Learners sometimes commit fully to yes or no when they're genuinely uncertain, when "I guess" captures that in-between feeling much more naturally.
Last one for today, anyways, the slightly more casual, informal version of anyway.
Some grammar purists dislike it, but it's genuinely common in casual native speech, especially in American English, as a relaxed way to redirect or wrap up a topic.
Anyways, that's basically the whole story. It signals an easy, informal close to a topic or tangent.
Let's add 3 more before we wrap up the list, because we've had so many requests for these specific ones. First, fair enough.
You didn't want to go. Fair enough. It signals a genuine acceptance of someone's reasoning, even if you don't fully agree with it yourself. And it's used constantly to close out a small disagreement gracefully.
Learners sometimes either argue further or just say "okay" when "fair enough" specifically communicates respectful acceptance in a very natural, native way.
Next one, my bad.
Oh, my bad, I totally forgot. It's a short, casual way to take responsibility for a small mistake. Much more relaxed than a full "I apologize" or even "sorry about that."
It's specifically for small, low-stakes mistakes among friends or casual acquaintances, and using it appropriately signals real comfort with casual native register.
And the last one, used as a filler and connector throughout a sentence.
It's just, a lot to take in. It doesn't add new information exactly, but it signals a shared understanding between speaker and listener, and it appears constantly in relaxed, natural conversation.
Native speakers use it almost as a rhythmic pause, giving themselves a beat to organize their next thought, and sprinkling it in naturally without overusing it adds real conversational texture.
So that's our expanded list, 23 words and short phrases altogether, each one doing real conversational work beyond its dictionary definition.
Let's talk for a second about why these specific words matter so much, beyond just sounding impressive, because I think the underlying pattern is genuinely useful to understand.
Almost every single word on this list is what's sometimes called a discourse marker, a small word that manages the flow, tone, and structure of conversation, rather than adding new factual content.
Textbooks focus heavily on content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, because they carry clear, teachable meaning, but discourse markers are what actually make speech sound natural and connected, rather than like a series of separate, disconnected, correct sentences.
Which is honestly why someone can have a huge, technically correct vocabulary and still sound slightly foreign, because they're missing these small, connective words that native speakers use almost unconsciously to link ideas together smoothly.
There's actually a really practical way to notice this pattern yourself without needing to memorize a giant list all at once. Next time you watch a native interview or podcast, try picking just one of these words, actually, or honestly, or I mean, and count how many times it shows up in a 5-minute stretch.
It's genuinely surprising how frequently these small words appear once you start actively listening for them. A single 5-minute native conversation might use I mean, and actually a combined dozen times or more, completely unconsciously.
And once you notice that frequency, it becomes a lot easier to understand why their absence feels so noticeable in a learner's speech, even when every individual sentence is grammatically flawless.
There's also a really natural, low-pressure way to start incorporating these words yourself, rather than trying to force all 20 into your speech at once, which would honestly sound a bit unnatural and overdone.
Right. We'd actually recommend picking just 2 or 3 from today's list, the ones that felt most natural or useful to you personally, and deliberately using those specific ones in your next few conversations, before gradually adding more over time.
Trying to consciously use all 20 at once would probably sound forced and unnatural anyway, almost like checking off a list rather than speaking naturally. Small, gradual integration works so much better than trying to force it all in immediately.
So the real takeaway here isn't just memorizing this specific list, it's noticing this whole category of words exists and paying close attention to them specifically when you're listening to native content.
Exactly. Once you start noticing discourse markers, you'll hear them constantly in every native conversation, podcast, or show. And picking even a few of them up naturally makes a noticeable difference in how fluent you sound.
Let us know in the comments which of today's words you're going to start using this week, and if there's a specific word or phrase you've noticed natives use that we didn't cover today.
We genuinely read every comment, and a lot of our future one-word shorts actually come directly from suggestions you all leave down there.
And honestly, if this longer format was helpful, the single most helpful thing you can do for us is hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every follow genuinely helps this channel grow.
The more of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing this with someone learning English right now, the more resources we have to keep making both these deeper long-form videos and the daily short clips you've been enjoying, instead of shallow, recycled tips you've already heard 100 times.
So if you believe in what we're building here, take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and consider sharing this with a friend who needs to hear it. It genuinely makes a difference, and it's the reason we're able to keep this going.
Thank you so much for being here, for real. We'll see you in the next one.